the prophecy to come about.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I'm like, go ahead, bring on the temple, bring on the sacrifices, bring on the altar, bring on all that stuff, because we know that it has to be rebuilt, and they have to resume that in order for it to cease.
And you think, how long is this going to take? Well, you got to remember, with all of it isn't going to take 20 years to rebuild the temple.
That's right.
It's going to take like 18 months.
Yeah.
And they've got plans, they've got all the blueprints, the only difference between the original temple and today's temple that they want to rebuild is in the blueprints they've got plumbing and electricity, you know?
And they have a Muslim mosque that they need to remove.
Huh?
And they have a Muslim mosque that they need to remove.
Oh. Well, yeah, and that's so far off the subject, but man, can I go into that one.
So, moving on.
I won't. Okay. My wife, when I left, my wife said, "Don't go into too many rabbit trails tonight." That's the fun out of the class. Okay, but anyway, here we go. Let's go back to this. So it's a prophecy that the Ark of the Covenant is going to disappear, and from the time of Josiah to today, no one has actually proven that they've laid eyes on the Ark. Some people have claimed it, but they've never been able. The Ethiopians think they got it in some place in Ethiopia. But anyway, let's go down to verse 18. That's what I turned the whole thing for. Okay? And this is the prophecy about these days right now with Ezra. And it says, in those days, the house of Judah will join the house of Israel, and together they will come from the northern land. Usually, enemies in the Bible are always described as coming from the north. I'm not sure why. There's certain indications in the Bible. Another thing is the Euphrates River. The Euphrates River, ever since the Garden of Eden, has been considered a traditional boundary between good and evil. You know, and so some of these things are just that way. But yes, you have a question again?
Yeah. Not a question. It could be because Cain's line and Esau's line always is against Israel or the tribes. And that lines up to the north because they went around the north.
Okay, thank you.
In that area.
You know, and throughout the Bible they will use that the land of the north is the land of evil, is the land of pagans, enemies of God. Okay, so do you notice here? Evidently, you people really have an excellent background. So I'm sure you know that for
Not me.
And I don't approve of personal corrections either. So
Sorry?
what I say. I've been a teacher all my life, and one of the things I learned early is if you don't know the answer, just make it up. Because nobody in the room probably knows it. No, I know it. That's on TV, isn't it? Okay, anyway, you have the prophecy here. And not only am I going to bring you back from captivity, but I'm going to reunite you. Remember Israel from the north with Solomon on, after Solomon, the Israel of the north and the Judah of the south were different kingdoms, and they weren't always even nice to each other at all. And Israel was kind of a godless land. There were a lot of people who loved God, but they had no power up there. Judah sometimes was quite godly, and at other times not so. But they've been enemies, or certainly separated for 400 and I'd say close to 500 years. And here's the prophecy in Jeremiah: when you come back, I'm going to reunite you. And after 500 years, Israelites from the north and Judeans from the south will again be one nation. You know, it's smaller, it's intimate, it's only got about 250,000 people, but it's united, and that's what the Bible tells us, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, now let's go to Ezra 4. Kevin is back, but he hasn't waved to me to quit, so let me go a little bit farther here. Let's go Ezra 4. Let's go first of all verses 1 through 6. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin was part of the the Judean kingdom, Simeon, Judah, of course, and Benjamin was the southern kingdom. Benjamin heard that its exiles were building a temple. When the enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that they were building a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and to the heads of the family and said, "Let us help you build, because like you, we seek your Lord, your God, and have been sacrificing to him since the time of Eshcalon, who was the king of Assyria, who brought us here." Now, of course, that's such a bald-faced lie, because they're trying to wiggle and worm their way into Israel so they can corrupt Israel, sabotage their temple building, and ruin the situation. And God tells Zerubbabel to be alert to these people. And it says in 3, but Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the family of Israel answered, "You have no part with us in building the temple of our God. We alone will build it for the Lord and the God of Israel." As King Cyrus, nothing like reminding you got a big bear standing behind you, does it, you know? So they're saying, yeah. And oh, by the way, you remember King Cyrus, you know, how he can rip you apart so easily? He told us we could do this. And so they're putting that in there. Has commanded us. Then the people around them set out to discourage the people of Judah and make them afraid to go on building. Then the threats begin. Now, if you look again at your handout, you'll see the map that's printed. And I've got two little designs there. It's another picture of Zion, which we're going to see a remarkable thing happen. Go back one page, Misty. Yeah, there. In the scriptures, and it's in Ezekiel, God tells Ezekiel that when Israel returns, which is going to be very soon, because remember, Daniel and Ezekiel lived about the same time. About the same time. They knew each other. And God tells Ezekiel, when you go home, you're going to be surrounded by enemies. In fact, you're always going to be surrounded by enemies. Is there anyone in this room that could doubt what's happened over the last 2,500 years? Israel has always been, like today, surrounded by enemies. It is surrounded by enemies today. People passionate about wanting to destroy them. And the same thing is true hundreds of years ago. And you'll see that the Arabs have been a race for, well, they go all the way back to Ishmael, but they haven't ever, at this time, they hadn't really become a nation. But you can see all the way back here in this history, 2,500 years ago, the Arabs were enemies of Israel. You know, the sons of Ishmael are always the enemies of the sons of Isaac, always. And you see it today. In fact, one of the most radical groups of Palestinians called Hamas, it hangs out a lot in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, they're claiming a direct descendancy from the Moabites and the Ammonites, so they can make a claim that they were back there. Well, they were back there, but they weren't the Moabites, because you can see the Arabs had their own group, and the Moabites had their own group. And you see these enemies surrounding Israel on the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. You had what was at that time called the people or the men of Ashdod, which is the Philistines. The Philistines, like Israel, lost their independence with the Babylonians and the Persians. And so they were called the people of Ashdod, 5 minutes. But that's who the Philistines. So you got the Philistines, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Arabs, and they're all plotting to destroy this little Israel that came home. And I've got 5 minutes, so let's, before we take a break, let's go to verse 12. And then we'll go to verse 21 and 23, and then we'll take a break. In verse 12 of Israel, the king should know that the Jews, this is what the enemies of Israel are doing. First of all, they make an alliance, a blood alliance, that they will not rest until Israel is dead and every Jew is dead. And they make a blood alliance between themselves. That's number one. And then number two, they not only do that physically, but it never materializes. Even though they have Israel outnumbered probably 10 to 1, it never materializes. But the other thing they do is they keep going back to Persia, because they're Persian citizens too, and make up lies about Israel and about their rebellion. And of course, did Israel have a history of rebellion? Look, I mean, just against the Babylonians. So their lie was believable. And it really kind of threw a real difficulty in the way of Israel for a while. But God will clear the head of the kings of Persia, and they'll see through this, and they will continue to back and support Israel. It says, the king should know that the Jews who have come up to us from you have gone to Jerusalem and are rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They are restoring the walls and repairing the foundations. What's a lie? Because the only thing they're doing is rebuilding this temple. That's all. They haven't done anything else, because the temple is first. And that's what Cyrus released them. You go back home and you rebuild your temple. And then he's saying, make a culture and get your economy going, and I'm going to tax you. That's what they all did. So nothing new. So let's go to verse 21 through 23, and and this is, you see, they got through to the king, and so now the king. This is not Cyrus. This is the next king. Now, and he says, now issue an order to these men to stop work, because he thinks they're rebuilding their walls so they can defend themselves and go to war against Persia. And so he's saying, send an edict to them, stop the work. Now, they went home, remember, they got home in 38, started rebuilding in 36. This is around 520, so it's been about 16 years later, and here they got the temple, like 3/4 finished, and the king's saying, stop. Oh no, stop, don't do anything. And to continue to work would be an act of war, and you wouldn't want to do that. You have to do what these kings tell you to do. Stop the work so that this city will not be rebuilt until I order so. Remember, the order had been to rebuild the temple, not to do anything else. And so be careful not to neglect this matter. Why let this threat grow to the detriment of the royal interest? And then in the bottom of, well, let's go to 23. As soon as the copy of this letter from King Artaxerxes, it was about the, actually, Artaxerxes' father was the husband of Esther. Esther was literally around, probably by this time she was the mother queen, you know, because of Artaxerxes, she was the mother queen. She was around and in the background of this return. And the Bible doesn't give us much insight. We know Esther, we know how she came into a position, we know how heroic and brave she was, but we don't know anything about the interworkings of this. But she was around, and she was very powerful in a good way. She had a lot of influence in Persia, and you know she was active in this, but we don't know for sure exactly what's done because it's not in the Bible anywhere. There's some things in Jewish history that talk about it. And this verse ends with, they went immediately to the Jews in Jerusalem and compelled them by force to stop. So this, you know, can you imagine the discouragement? You've spent 16 years living in rubble, rebuilding the temple of God, and you almost got it done, and these liars get the government to make you stop. And all of a sudden you're in the middle of nowhere with nothing but an unfinished temple, and everybody's against you. And that's the position where we're at right now. And you're free to wander about the cabin. How long? 5 minutes?